I'm I'm here today with Jonathan Eig. This is such a wonderful book, The Birth of the Pill. I learned so much. It was so exciting. You take this story that is really, a lot of it is about medical merchandising, and you make it incredibly exciting. And I'm curious to know, your previous books were about baseball and Al Capone. What made you choose this subject?
Well, it's funny because I really had not had it on my radar at all. And it must have been 10, 12 years ago, I had heard a rabbi give a sermon about the importance of thinking of yourself as a partner with God and being able to change the world. Not just to improve yourself, not just to be kinder to the people around you, but that we have a responsibility to think about how we can transform our very existence. And he said, as an example, the birth control pill. Think about how the inventors of the birth control pill must have set out to create one of the most important inventions of all time, something that would completely fundamentally change human dynamics, marriage, reproduction. But he never said who invented the birth control pill or how we got it, and I became really curious. It struck me as odd that anybody would have on their agenda in the 1950s, you know, a pill for the sexual liberation of women, something that would free women to control their fertility. In the 1950s, when men were controlling all the drug companies, who did that? So that's where the idea came from. I just became curious, and when I looked into it, I found this incredible story of these outsiders, these underdogs, really, who would no enfranchisement, no government support, no university support, setting out to do something that everybody told them was impossible. So that's the part that really appealed to me at first.
Can you sketch out what life was like before the pill?
I think people today, certainly I took it for granted. I think many people today took it for granted. Before the 1960s, when the pill became commonly used, the options for contraception were very limited. Abortion and abstinence were really your two best bets, but abortion was very unsafe. Abstinence was harder, easier said than done. And you know, you had condoms, you had some options that were available for women who went through their doctors. But women really had to go through men to get access to even those ineffective and inaccessible forms of contraception. So the average family size was 3.7 women in the 1950s. Many women had 8, 9 children. Womanhood equaled motherhood in many people's minds. A woman's purpose was to be a vessel. And options were very limited, so you didn't see the kinds of opportunities women have today to go to college, to go to graduate school, to start careers. It was a very different world, and even things like, as you point out in your book so well, that marital rape was not illegal. Marital rape was not grounds for divorce. This was really society was so different in the way women, the opportunities that presented women, and just their ability to control their own bodies. So the pill was one factor in turning that around, but it was an important factor.
Until the 30s. Disseminating information about birth control was illegal.
That's right.
And so even those methods, the condom and the diaphragm, were very hard to come by, and people didn't know about them. You talk in your book about how women would follow Margaret Sanger and say, tell us the secret. What's the secret?
Right, that there must be some magical solution that only she knew, but they really felt like they were prevented from getting that information because the government would arrest people even who disseminated that. She got arrested several times just for putting things in the mail.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just until the 30s. Those laws remained on the books. They weren't always enforced, but they remained on the books in many states until the 60s.
In Connecticut, for example,
right.
It was until 1965 with Griswold versus Connecticut that struck down a law that said birth control, the sale and use of birth control, even by married couples, was illegal.
That's right. And in Massachusetts as well, until the late 60s, and that's where they were doing this research on the birth control pill, which presented some problems. How do you test the pill to know if it works if even disseminating information about it is illegal?
Yeah. You structure the book in such an interesting way as the story of 4 people coming together to create the pill. Could you just walk us through who those people were and what their role in the development of the pill was?
Yeah, what I loved about this story was that it really is a human drama. It's these 4 really dynamic characters. They're all rebels. They're all aware that they're throwing bombs here, that they're doing something incredibly risky, and that without any one of them, it all falls apart. The first is Sanger, who we mentioned, and she's been saying since the 1920s that there ought to be a miracle tablet That's her term, a miracle tablet that would allow women to turn on and off their reproductive systems. And she's very specific about what this should entail. It has to be something women control, that they can keep in their purses, that men don't necessarily know they're taking it, and that when they're done taking it, they can get pregnant again. She's very specific about this, but scientists all tell her it's folly, that it's stuff of science fiction. It'll never happen. The science isn't there, and it's illegal anyway. What drug company is going to manufacture such a thing? What university is going to support such research? But she keeps asking for years and years, for decades. Every scientist she meets who's interested in this area, what can we do? And finally, in 1950, she meets a guy named Gregory Pincus, who's a biologist, one of the world's leading experts in mammalian reproduction. He's been fired from Harvard because he's too radical and because he's Jewish at a time of great anti-Semitism. In the 1930s, he was experimenting with in vitro fertilization and declaring that someday science would control the reproductive process and women would have far more flexibility in when and how they got pregnant. Men might not even be necessary at all, he said, and that scared people tremendously. And he couldn't find work anywhere, so he's working out of a garage that he built. He starts his own scientific foundation, going door to door in Worcester, Mass, asking people for donations. And when Sanger meets him, he says, "Oh, I could do a birth control pill. Sure, if you got the money, I could make you a birth control pill." And she's just flabbergasted. How's that possible? But he explains how it would work, and it's very simple in his mind that the woman already has a contraceptive in her body, and it's called progesterone. When she's pregnant, she can't get pregnant again because progesterone is emitted and tells the body not to produce more babies. That's the simplest way he explains it to her. And she says, "Great, what would it take?" And he says, a couple $1,000s to get.
It was pretty
just
cheap,
for starters.
wasn't
Yeah,
it?
just for
Yeah.
starters. But then Sanger goes out and finds an ally in Catherine Dexter McCormick. She's the third of my quartet, and she agrees to fund the whole project. She's a wealthy heiress whose husband left her hundreds of millions of dollars when he died, and she says whatever it takes. She'll build laboratories. She'll buy the animals they need for the testing. She'll write blank checks for Pincus and whatever else he might need. Pincus does need one more thing, though. He needs a doctor who knows how to treat women because he's a lab guy. So he finds John Rock, a Catholic gynecologist, one of the most respected fertility experts in the country, and gets him to come along and agree to work with them. So now you've got somebody who brings respectability to this, somebody who's also Catholic and is willing to challenge the church and say, no, sex is good for marriage. It shouldn't just be for reproduction. And these four people really on their own, with of course some others involved, but really this core group of four people set out to do something that everybody tells them is impossible.